Now I would like to introduce our speaker, David Ebert from Purdue University. David, we are honored to have David here. He is first Vice President of the Computer Society of IEEE for 2006 and Vice President of Publications. He's also an IEEE Fellow. I could go on and tell all his titles, so thank you, David. Yes.
Thank you very much for coming to the session today. I wanted to cover some of the issues that we're talking about in terms of going into examples and what I see are the main challenges with security through trusted collaboration over social networks. I'm going to start off by telling you why I'm here, where I see and when can social media help, tools and opportunities, and then some questions. And the reason I'm here and why this is of interest to me is because I direct a U.S. Department of Homeland Security Center of Excellence, directly looking at how new technology and the community can help the first responder community. And so this center actually has 29 institutions that have been active over the past 3 years. There's been more over the previous years, and over 75 faculty. And we currently have active funded partners in 4 different countries within the world. So we work with a lot of end user agencies. We've deployed tools to a lot of Department of Homeland Security components such as TSA, Coast Guard, etc. We also have worked with over 40 public safety and law enforcement agencies across the U.S. that are actively deploying and testing out some of our tools that we've developed. And in doing this, one of the things we started when we worked with these groups is sort of asking them, how can social media be useful to them? Where can they use it? And we tried to come up with a framework and based on the input that they provided back in terms of educating a larger audience, getting the community aware of things that are available, bringing issues to them, letting them know what resources are available. There was just a training workshop that was done to help students to help citizens become vigilant and aware of their surroundings and reduce their opportunity for them being a victim of crime. Foster a partnership between the community in the U.S. and it seems all over the world. This idea of community-based policing and safety is really become quite prevalent, and social media is a great opportunity to take advantage of that. Another thing that's really growing there is software platforms such as Nextdoor from a company in the U.S. that allows communities to create neighborhood social networks and share information among themselves and determine what they share with law enforcement, but allows that to be a point for information to come out from the public safety agencies to the community and make sure that we have trust within the community. Finally, the thing that we focused on in terms of technology for the law enforcement as opposed to the community side is improving situational awareness, crime prevention, and technical response through some tools we've created. And I'll show you a couple examples of the use of one of our tools that we call SMART now for this. So it's what we call our social media analytics and reporting toolkit. It's an interactive real-time system that uses the geolocated tweets and Instagram posts worldwide coming in real time, being analyzed and providing information to end users. It's been used by a lot of different organizations for a lot of different activities over the past 3 years so far. And with this, let's see, there we go. With this, we've found lots of ways that the tool can be helpful. First of all, if you're planning a large event, how can you get a better understanding of crowd activity? What are concerns what are the dangers, what are emerging topics within the crowd, and how can you make sure that you have the right forces allocated to make sure the public's safe along different areas. Then if you have recurring events, something that's going on all the time, how can you do better planning? If there's recurring sporting events, we've used this numerous times there. If there's unexpected events that occur, can you get a better idea of what's going on, where are the points of need, what information is just being communicated by the media versus what does the community really need, and deploy your responders appropriately to this. And can you crowdsource information in to have eyes all over in such situations? And can you determine unusual daily activities that you should be vigilant about and try to deter? So I'll show some examples of some of these. First of all, if you look at large-scale planned events, our tool was used during Super Bowl in New Jersey 2 years ago, and we do anomaly detection after we classify all the real-time Twitter data coming in, and the most anomalous topic that popped up was Philip Seymour Hoffman, because he committed suicide that day. It was actually more anomalous than football and Super Bowl, because people always tweet about the Super Bowl in New Jersey at the end of January. Just happened to be more that time, which is why it came in as the second most topic, but people don't tweet that often about that given actor. With recurring events, one of the things we've used this for is at the Purdue football game, and where this has been used at every home football game during Purdue's season last year. This year it's been used at the Ohio State football games with Ohio State Highway Patrol. And one of the things that our police chief mentioned was they kept on having this problem a year ago. Near the end of the game, someone would tweet that someone in their group was going to beat up the opposing band member if they didn't stop playing so loud. So in which case, the police officer, since they had the geolocation of where in the stands they were, would send 2 officers up to scan them. No violence occurred. So it was a way to them to diffuse the situation very carefully. If you look at the Purdue football stadium versus Ohio State football stadium, you see there's a lot more tweets that are occurring, and the system does scale to that level of activity because you have 300,000 people showing up for for an Ohio State home football game versus about 20,000 for a Purdue game. Similarly, with all of these crises that occur, whether it's a normal event that turns violent, there's unpredictable things that occur in a community, you can use this type of situation to get a much better idea of what's going on. And these are solutions that our first responders need. If you think of the Umpqua Community College shooting that occurred up in Washington State a few months ago, or you think of the San Bernardino shooting that just occurred in an office place a few days ago. How can people understand the situation? How can they get information that bystanders are taking and use that in real time? And that's where we started using our tool for these type of events. This is actually what the type of tweets and the different topics or different areas that were occurring during the Umpqua school shooting. So you can see as people gathered together to look at what was going on, you could also see that and see how the community is recovering, or is there still unrest that's growing. We also use this for something that occurred in a building next to where our lab is at Purdue, where there was one teaching assistant who went in and stabbed another teaching assistant and shot the student, and then went out and surrendered to police, luckily. I mean, he went out and knelt on the curb and waited for the police to come and arrest him, which was the best possible situation as a result of that, because it was in a building that how do you clear the building. And looking at this, you can start looking at the communication and see who are the followers and who are the leaders, who's retweeting this information. So you can just start seeing the way information is being posted, and even very quickly get firsthand reports of what's going on. You can also see who's influencing the communication. Someone who actually snapped an image of the suspect being escorted away became one of the most influential persons at the beginning of that event. Then if you follow that event for several days, you can actually see the dynamics of the topics and the networks of communication of people change. From initially everything talking about the shooting to it breaking into separate communities, some discussing the investigation and some discussing concern for the family of the student and sympathy. And so you can actually watch these different topics and the networks evolve over time, so you can see the evolution of things. You can also begin to see the communication patterns between different groups and communities, such as is occurring here, where you're looking at who's tweeting what, the response from people, and how they're communicating over time as things go on. So these are ways, again, that social media can help in these type of situations. They can also help in natural disasters. If you look at Hurricane Joaquin that occurred very late in the season here in the U.S., you can see where all the Twitter traffic's going. You can look at what people are tweeting about. You can pull up images. You can link to Facebook pages, see who's having serious problems, see what the concerns in the community are. So these are all ways that these tools can be used to help you get a better sense of not only the resiliency of the community, the problems they're facing, and the concerns of citizens. So these are all good ways to use these type of tools. And finally, one of the things that really relates to things that have occurred recently is when the Coast Guard was using one of our systems, for a week-long event, we had a safety word in the keyword list for them of kill. And everybody kills everything in a tweet, it turns out. I killed that exam, he killed that shot, that team killed this is a kill or something, so it wasn't very useful and I suggested removing it, and they said, well, it's actually something we want to leave in here, and this is why. Because they just had, this tweet came up where someone was saying that someone in their class had said, I'm literally going to kill someone, and he was suggesting that everyone skip school. The next day they were able to pull up the public Facebook pages of both of these people, and they actually found it to be credible intelligence, the police department, and they went and investigated these two people. And instead of that being a real big deterrent, actually the people started tweeting about the fact that the Coast Guard and the police are monitoring all their tweets. But this was a case of this information is just one additional source to try to prevent actions that can become quite serious before they occur. So those are some of the things we've done in terms of the use of social media and how we've worked with community agencies. And from the Major League Baseball All-Star Game that occurred this summer to our local community on football days and other groups that our Ohio State Highway Patrol is using it quite often. The U.S. Coast Guard used it during a kayaktivist protest where people were going to use kayaks to blockade the harbor and stop a ship that was being repaired from going up to the Arctic. The Coast Guard didn't want to stop the kayaktivists. They wanted to make sure that these big ships didn't plow over and cause death of the kayakers, so they wanted to make it a safe environment. These are all cases where this type of tool has been a big success. And that really leads to what are the issues in trying to use this and to get trust, and how can you use this? There is the issue of trust when you get this data in. So far, the information that we've seen, the most common information, people aren't trying to mislead law enforcement. But how do you make sure that that doesn't occur? How do you identify the leaders, the followers, pull up information if you're taking them as a valid source of information to see, should you trust them? Can you actually believe them? And when you send things out to the public, do they believe you? With reliability, can you count on this information to make a critical decision? Oftentimes, this becomes something that is another source of information, and that's why we always let the decision maker continue to make the decision. They can compare it to the valid, vetted people that they have on the ground to say, are you seeing this there, or have you gone there? These type of things. There's network delay problems with this data. After the Haiti earthquake, basically people had texted when they were in distress, and as the cell towers came back online, all of those messages had been queued up. So days later, messages were coming out from people saying they were trapped in buildings, and they were no longer alive at that point. And so the question became, do you investigate that when you haven't found any sign of life in that building or not? These are issues you need to really consider when you're relying on this digital information. And what is the information diffusion path? How do we tell retweets versus mass interest in something? Can you make sure it isn't something that someone found was interesting and it's the same tweet that's gone around among 100 people versus 100 people who are giving you eyewitness reports on something? And what is the main point, or do you want to do both? Do you want to use this for crowd informing? Do you want to get information out to people to be helpful? Do you want to use it for crowdsourcing to give you a greater presence and better situational awareness? And can you reliably do both of these things? Our university, after that shooting occurred, had sent out text messages and broadcast alerts. I was heading into the university back to my office after an appointment somewhere else on campus. Someone called me and said the building was in a lockdown. They had an old phone number registered for me. I guess I hadn't updated it, so I never got the text message. The first problem that I knew that there was a big issue is when I saw the police chiefs that I tend to work with standing out there directing traffic and everything blocked off for a block around. I didn't know I wasn't supposed to go around that barrier and that there could be an active shooter situation actually occurring because the information wasn't getting to me. So can you trust that, and how do you use that information? And then the whole issue of privacy. What information should you gather, and what information is reasonable? What expectation of privacy do people have? It varies from country to country. I know in the U.S., according to the law, and any interpretation that's very lenient of the law, it's perfectly reasonable for people to collect every publicly posted tweet, Instagram message, anything like that. There's no expectation of privacy. The federal government can pull that information in. The U.S. government currently, most agencies, at least within Homeland Security, do not collect that information and do not want to hold it because they're not sure if the public opinion is going to change, and they will feel that's an invasion of privacy. But according to the IRB researchers at most universities, mining publicly available Twitter data is perfectly acceptable, and there's no expectation of privacy. But this is something that may end up changing. And to me, the question is, will people realize what's going on and stop sharing all that information, right? I mean, I don't think most people realize how people are using this and mining this data. And so with all of these considerations, can we come up with the right boundary? And where does privacy-preserving research and information sharing and maybe even information theory come into play to allow you to do this appropriately? So those are some questions that I came up with for a discussion to end our session here. So with that, see if anyone has any comments on any of these. Yes.
I have a question. With all those smart and wearable devices that collect information about anything we do, I mean, from my watch is constantly monitoring my pulse. They're watching how much steps I've made, how high, how low I've gone, and if I go to my house, they're monitoring my energy consumption, the amount of sun from my solar panel. I leave out the cameras, which is a huge chapter. First question is, this information is available on the cloud. Most of the providers already give you an option. I'm not sure at which extent people know that their information goes to the cloud in order to reach their devices. Now, are there any thoughts of using the information or any thoughts of privacy concerns about this information?
I mean, this always becomes one of the big issues of researchers in privacy-preserving data fusion. Right? I mean, there in a lot of areas, I think in this area there isn't a lot of public awareness and a lot of maybe company awareness in trying to do that. But in public health, this is something where people have looked at this problem for quite a while in terms of what statistics can you collect, what statistics can you be made available. If you look at U.S. cancer rates per county and incidence of cancer, if there are less than N people per M,000, they do not record that rate, because the view is that that combined with other information in the area can uniquely identify that individual. Public health syndromic surveillance collects things normally at the zip code level in the U.S., considering that's synonymous because of the number of households. The view is you can't accurately do outbreak detection at that coarse of a scale. So some people do it at a much finer resolution, but when you start putting all of this information together and people just go in and look at your thermostat data and see that you've set it to be 65 degrees and hold for the next 12 days, it's a pretty good indication you're probably not going to be there. So this is information that it's the convenience versus the security, right? People are thinking it's convenient to have that information and say, oh, I forgot to change the thermostat when I get to Hawaii and I need to save money and cut that down, but someone else can get into it just as well. It's just like the people put things on their public profile and don't think about how people are combining that data together. And it's clear that the monetary incentive is there for companies to start pulling all of this information and making money off of it. The one area where I've seen a lot of concern over the sharing of data that goes up to the cloud is in agriculture. Farmers, John Deere, I'm not sure how international they are, but they're probably the largest U.S. producer of farm equipment here right now. And you buy a combine, it's $250,000 to $750,000. It collects a huge amount of data that gets uploaded to the cloud. John Deere does not use any of the data on things that are sensed in the field because the farmer owns that data. They could not get anyone to allow them to create an information system where they have that data. They hold it, but they don't have the right to use it. All they can do is keep information about the maintenance of the equipment. And but it's considered a very valuable resource, and it's sort of surprising that maybe it's the larger farms that protested against this, but this is information that you think of, not necessarily your traditional old farmer not being the most tech savvy, but they won't allow that because of privacy. And so, do you get different ads that come to your mailbox based on the appliances that you have registered with the manufacturer and what they're doing and how often the door is open, so they know how many people you have in your family? Things like this. Question? Yes?
If I may go back to the reliability aspect, can we count on this information? In your experience, up to now, are the law enforcement agents considering it increasingly or decreasingly reliant on the information that they get through social networks?
I think they're starting to rely on it more because they haven't seen mass spoofing of information. But I mean, I'm sure there probably have been cases that have occurred and good ways to do it. It's always a concern that they have, but when a situation occurs and they want any information they can, they may use it to decide to redeploy some people to further investigate. But this becomes a really hard question, and as most studies have shown, you can get very reliable information from the crowd. And there's actually research where services to aid people with disabilities, where they can get answers from crowdsourced answers within 2 or 3 minutes. For instance, someone who's visually impaired taking a picture of the outfit they have on to see if the tie goes with the shirt. They have registered users who will agree to answer those. and questions that they might not want to ask other people just for the bother, or the instructions on a microwave dinner. These are things that people rely on all the time now, and I never thought of relying on your daily function from the crowd and consider it reliable, but that project has had very good results, and as far as I know, no serious incidents. So do you do real quick, do you do something like what's the next door, where you allow people to register as being vetted contributors of information, sort of citizens that are reliable sources if something happens in your neighborhood? So you have them registered, you know they're in that area, and they make sense.
Okay. You remember the hoax by Orson Welles about the attack of the aliens. Now,
Not personally, but I know.
Okay, you're right. Now, more and more people depend on social networks for information, and we also see that it's quite frequent that people spoof the accounts of someone famous to write something, and then they have to go out and say, no, it wasn't me, my account was spoofed, or someone created an account in my name. So how probable do you think it is that someone would like to make an attack, for example, in a big event, and try to fuse such information so that they may say that there is a bomb in the stadium and people get panicked? Do you think that this is probable, or do you think of such danger?
I think it is. I mean, if you just look at some of the transnational criminal organizations and the amount of Twitter traffic that they use to advertise to people and recruit people now, if someone's really going to plan, I mean, governments do this right now in getting information out of war zones to try to influence the population. And I know that branches of the U.S. government have used social media to try to recruit people to join up, since we have a volunteer service and things like this. But so I'm sure there's a lot of misinformation that's going out there that people are using in some situations for this, and it makes perfect sense. There's a lot of smart criminals out there, and most of the non-smart criminals are in prison. So, as a former law enforcement officer who worked with me said, prison isn't full of smart criminals. So you also don't want your employee to tell you it's very easy to get away with murder. He could do it and no one would catch him. But, yes.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, in this case, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.